مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. تواجه أميركا بعض القرارات المهمة جدا بخصوص أمور عدة كسقف الدين ومحاربة التضخم ودعم أوكرانيا ومصير ديمقراطيتنا وهوية المرشحين القادمين لمنصب رئيس الجمهورية. هذه قضايا مهمة ستحدد قوة أمريكا في الداخل والخارج للأعوام القادمة. في هذه الأثناء يطغى التشتت على سياساتنا بدءا من قصة جورج سانتوس الغريبة، الرجل الذي حطم الرقم القياسي العالمي بعدد الأكاذيب للفوز بمقعد في الكونغرس، انتهاء بالتنافس على مقعد إلهام عمر في لجنة الشؤون الخارجية في مجلس النواب. السياسيون الأمريكيون يقدرون وقت وطاقة السياسة بشكل لا يؤثر في القضايا الكبيرة في يومنا هذا. هل هو مجرد هروب آني من القضايا المهمة فعلا؟ أم أنه رد فعل على التحول من السيطرة الديمقراطية إلى الجمهورية في مجلس الكونغرس؟ أم أن هذا أمر أكثر خطورة يتمثل في الإعجاب عن مواجهة القضايا المهمة فعلا؟ لمناقشة الأيام الأولى للكونغرس الجديد يسرني أن أرحب بهيئة من الخبراء السياسيين اللامعين ستيف كليمنز، أليكس جانجيتانو وتود جيلمان. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. It's the most important speech a president gives any year. It's the State of the Union speech. It brings together all the big themes of an administration, lays out an agenda, puts down a few markers for political opponents, and sets the pace and scope of the direction of American politics for the coming year. And we are talking with our guests just after President Biden delivered his second State of the Union speech. We're going to talk about what it meant, what he said, what it means for American politics, and some of the other issues that are on our political agenda. I'm delighted to welcome Steve Clemens and Tod Gilman. Alex Gangitano should be joining us any moment. Gentlemen, how did the president do at his State of the Union? Tod, let me begin with you.
Well, I think it depends on who you are. If you're a Democrat, he did great. It was a very upbeat, forward-thinking, energetic message with a robust call to action on gun violence and reproductive rights, and a unifying message on Ukraine and economic growth. And if you are a Republican, what we were hearing from Republicans after the speech is that he should have started it with "Once Upon a Time," because it was so filled with fairy tales and fantasy about how the border is in good shape and how the American economy is doing well, even though gasoline prices are high and cartons of eggs still cost $5 in a lot of places. So it's like a lot of things in Washington, it depends where you stand, depends on where you sit.
And Steve, if you're Joe Biden, did you sleep well after the State of the Union address?
Oh, I think he slept very well. He even had Donald Trump giving him some soft compliments, saying, President Biden, worked hard on that speech, and you could see it, and that he ended up on a stronger note at the beginning. To see even barely positive comments from Donald Trump, I think is a net positive for Joe Biden.
And any big surprises from what the president said?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me, and I wrote about it in our Semaphore Principles, was that Joe Biden softened the tone on China. Right now, we just had recently a Chinese spy balloon be shot out of the air by an F-22 over water over the Atlantic Ocean that had floated across the United States. And you felt tensions really rising. And we had Air Force generals predicting in the next 2 years a hot kinetic war between China and the United States. I was surprised that in this moment, after canceling Secretary of State Blinken's trip to China, that he took steps to return to the sort of tone he had with Xi Jinping in Bali recently, and put a floor on that relationship, and basically wound down and talked about the areas of cooperation that China and the United States could do together in addition to competition. I think that was a brave moment, because you could have very easily imagined that the president of the United States, he would have had bipartisan support, could have ratcheted up the tensions with China and didn't. That was a surprise to me.
Todd, any surprises for you?
I was surprised, candidly, at how unruly and rude so many of the Republicans were. I was in the chamber the year that a congressman shouted out at President Obama, "You lie." And there was round denunciation of him, and there was an apology. And last, at the most recent State of the Union with Biden, we saw dozens and dozens, not just of booing and jeering, but shouting, "You lie," and like outright heckling of the President of the United States. So on the one hand, and I was thinking about this, boy, you know, Congress has a 20% approval rating, give or take, and the president has an approval rating in the high 40%, mid 40%. So really, he's in an advantageous position against them. I don't think this did Congress any favors. On the other hand, we know that democracy is different than authoritarianism, and you can't imagine Putin being heckled like this. There are a lot of presidents around the world who would not be heckled like this giving a speech to their parliament. So I guess the good news in that is that this is a proof that American democracy is still thriving. But boy, it was just an incredibly childish display. And congressmen have so many opportunities, so many outlets for rebutting the president, but not in real time vocally during the speech. It was just remarkable.
Can I add one element? Can I add one element to what Todd said?
Sure.
And that is, you know, that it's very important with what Todd said about the misbehavior of some members of Congress there. But it's even more important that Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, the senior Republican, told them not to do that. And so it's yet another fault line that Kevin McCarthy, who was gracious, who welcomed the president, who stood up with some of the things, who didn't rip up his speech like Nancy Pelosi did of Donald Trump, told his caucus, do not be rude, do not do what he had done. So I just wanted to say, it's, you know, to put an exclamation point next to what Todd said, because of Kevin McCarthy giving an admonition against his team from doing that, and they just ignored him.
Well, and that's an interesting point because
hold on. I want to get Alex into this conversation. Alex, welcome.
Well, to add to
I know it's tough to get a word in edgewise with these guys.
No, it's great. But
so when you think about the State of the Union, any big surprise emerges from you?
Well, going off of this conversation, a big surprise for me was how the president handled these Republican members of Congress. I mean, this is an 80-year-old president who has been hearing criticism over his age. Is he too old to run, from progressives, from Republicans, from some more mainstream Democrats as well? And he handled it actually very well. I mean, that was kind of old school Biden on display, I think, during the State of the Union. We saw him. He was feisty. He was ready to talk back. He had crosstalk with these members. He talked off the cuff. And I think that there's been criticism that he's too scripted, that we don't see that side of Biden anymore, that side that was very much on display when he was vice president, and of course, when he was senator. So I think the way that he responded to this heckling, which I'm sure isn't easy, I've never been in that position, but hearing the yells and the jeers from different House Republicans, and he was right there with them, ready to crosstalk and wanting to prove his point, especially on something like Social Security and Medicare, when he was saying, all right, so we're all in agreement. We're not trying to cut that. Okay. If you're promising that, then I'll drop it, kind of thing. And I think that was a huge point for them, for the White House, because they had to really show off that he's ready to hit the campaign trail again. And I think this State of the Union really helped prove that point. So
that actually leads me to the big question. After this speech, is there any doubt that Joe Biden is running for re-election? Todd.
There's no doubt, and the way that we know that for sure is the repetition of the phrase "let's get the job done." Let's get the job done on gun violence. We've started with certain things last year that were common ground. We still need to ban assault-style weapons. Let's get the job done. We need to codify abortion rights that the Supreme Court stripped away. Let's get the job done. It's a perfect transition from being president at a State of the Union address to being an active candidate for re-election. I need a second term to finish the work that you put me in the White House to do. Let's get the job done. The only thing I was going to say with Steve, the heckling from the Republican backbenchers, I think gave McCarthy, the speaker, and President Biden an opportunity to bond. They now have a common enemy. And, I actually think that if anything comes out of this speech, it might be, an ability of them to get the job done against those people.
So what we saw was pre-negotiation over a debt ceiling deal.
Exactly.
So again, any hesitation, Joe Biden has been running for re-election. Any doubt about that has now been put to rest. Does everybody agree?
Well, look, I mean, my view is that Joe Biden feels deeply in his bones that if Donald Trump is on the Republican ticket, that it would be unpatriotic of him not to run, because he views himself as the only one that can beat Trump. Whether that's true or not, but I think that's Joe Biden's thinking. I think there are people around Joe Biden that question whether his age is a factor, whether he's still on the ball. I think Alex Gangitano is right that many people have not seen that vigor and style from Joe Biden in a while. And so there is a kind of institutional uncertainty, even with Joe Biden saying he's going to run, even with Donald Trump saying he's going to run, there's doubt, and we see other people challenging them. So we may be in a situation where both Trump and Biden are both saying they're going to run, and they actually go and run. But let's see what it looks like a year from now. Will both of them still be in the race? And that, I think, there may be a little bit of a question mark.
Just on this, I was watching some of the talk shows after the speech. I saw Nancy Pelosi predict that there will not be a single Democrat to primary Joe Biden. What's your view on this? If he decides to run, is it an unchallenged path to the nomination? Alex?
I think so. I think with so much division in the Republican Party, and Kevin McCarthy's in a tight spot with some of the more hardline members of his party, I think Republicans are really going to run with this. Or excuse me, I think Democrats are really going to run with this and try to show that they're the united party. They don't have these kind of divisions that the Republican side has, and having somebody primary the president wouldn't be, in line with that. So I think we're not going to see that.
Great. When we come back after the break, we're going to move from the State of the Union address to some of the political issues that have been permeating Congress, Capitol Hill since the arrival of the new House Republican majority. And we'll talk about how they intersect with the president's agenda. On that in just a moment. Again, our guests today include Alex Gangitano. Alex is White House reporter at The Hill, where she previously was the Herd on the Hill and the lobbying reporter. Earlier in her career, she was a staff writer for CQ Roll Call. Also with us, Todd Gilman. Todd has spent more than 30 years as a reporter for the Dallas Morning News, including the past decade as its Washington bureau chief. He is past president of the Regional Reporters Association and has been elected 3 times to the board of the White House Correspondents Association. And joining us is Steve Clemens. Steve is the founding editor-at-large for Semaphore, a new international news site. Previously, he was at The Hill, The Atlantic, New America Foundation, and the Nixon Center for Peace and Freedom. All right, the State of the Union comes about a month after Kevin McCarthy took control of the House of Representatives, not easily, but he did, following which we've seen some of the Republican leadership's early acts For example, committee assignments, including a controversial vote to remove a Minnesota Congresswoman, Ilhan Omar, from the Foreign Affairs Committee. Why begin the new Congress by this controversial move against a Democratic Congresswoman? Todd, let me begin with you.
Well, on the surface, it is over complaints that Congresswoman Omar has said anti-Semitic things and is generally bigoted. There's an undercurrent of anti-Muslim sentiment that perhaps is fueling some of the desire by some Republicans to marginalize her. And more broadly, it's payback for some of the moves that Democrats took in the last Congress under Speaker Pelosi to when Pelosi refused to seat a couple of choices that McCarthy had made on the January 6th committee, the special committee that was investigating the mob attack on the US Capitol when the presidential election was being certified. So there's a saying that payback is hell. This is kind of a weird sideways way of paying back Democrats. And once this precedent has been set, this was a warning 2 years ago by Republicans. Hey, if you're going to start kicking our people off of committees, we're going to start kicking your people off of committees. And there's a bit of that tit for tat going on.
And Alex, what is the Republican argument in defense of Republican Congresspeople who have said some things that are as objectionable as Ilhan Omar on issues regarding anti-Semitism, for example? I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene is not your most philo-Semitic congresswoman when it comes to Jewish space lasers and other such things.
That's right. But I think Speaker McCarthy's leadership style so far, and actually what we saw when he was rising through the ranks of the Republican caucus, is that he's a people pleaser. He wants everybody to get along with him. He wants the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Paul Gosars in his camp and the moderate Republicans, that he's not the type to slap somebody on the wrist and say, you didn't say the right thing here, or you need to apologize here. And so I think he's letting something slide within his own caucus. But he also, something like taking Ilhan Omar off of her committee assignment really rallies Republicans. This is something that I think a lot of the party is excited about. And like Todd mentioned, this tit for tat, I think this is something we'll see, honestly, at the start of every Congress going forward, that there's going to be a controversial figure that people want to kind of get revenge and take off of a committee assignment. And so this is a rallying point for Republicans. I think they're excited to see it happen. I think it gives Kevin McCarthy a little bit of the backbone he needs to show that he's not going to let Democrats walk all over him, and he's going to defend every Republican.
So actually, Steve, I was just going to press on this. So that we talked about a tit for tat, but we're likely to see further payback in the future. Is this now the way business is going to be conducted in the House of Representatives?
Oh, I think absolutely. And I also think, you've got to watch out in the Senate too. I mean, you see, even when Senator Joe Manchin, raised questions last year about high inflation and whether the size of then what was the Build Back Better bill made sense for America, one of his Senate Democratic colleagues, Martin Heinrich from New Mexico, said maybe Joe Manchin should lose his chairmanship of the Energy Committee. So people looking at taking scalps or removing people from their committees or trying to kneecap them in that way, I think is going to be part of this. And we also live in a might makes right world. You ask a really important question about Marjorie Taylor Greene versus Ilhan Omar. You can go over and over and look and measure the hypocrisy on both sides. How can they put this woman on a committee, given some of the things that she said about the Jewish community? And right now, that's the nature of Kevin McCarthy having a razor thin margin. He's got to do deals with some of the most strident and sometimes uncomfortable members in his caucus. And that's going to mean taking positions away from others. So I do believe you're going to see Democrats basically begin, creating a grudge list. And when they come back, they're going to do the same thing and vice versa.
And Todd, the last word?
I'll just take Ukraine support as an example of an area where there is a very vocal minority in the Republican Party who is resisting military aid to Ukraine, but there are, as the saying goes, adults in the room, adults at the leadership level of the Republican Party who absolutely support shoring up Ukraine as a bulwark against Russian aggression. And that will definitely be an area of unified support.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve Clemens, Alex Gangitano, and Todd Gilman for joining me on Dakhel Washington. Bye-bye. Every once in a while, something happens to remind us that we are not the center of the universe, that while we often waste our time on issues that are frivolous, banal, and downright silly, there are real issues of life and death that demand our attention. The terrible earthquake that hit central Turkey, destroying huge parts of that country, as well as large tracts of northern Syria, was just such an event. In an instant, thousands were killed, with many times that made homeless. Entire cities are rubble, as are many of the most valuable and meaningful historic sites of civilizations that harken back to the dawn of urban existence. This disaster hit two countries that have been fighting and competing for years, Erdogan's Turkey and Assad's Syria. One is a NATO ally, though a difficult and complicated ally, led by a difficult and complicated leader. The other is a junior partner in an axis led by Russia and Iran, led by a genocidal leader responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of his own countrymen and women. In neither country should the fate of people suffering unspeakable horror be held hostage by the personality of its leader. Indeed, we are seeing some remarkable responses already, such as the dispatch from Israel of emergency supplies and rescue teams to assist its on-again, off-again, on-again partner Turkey, but an even more remarkable offer to assist the devastated people of its enemy of long standing in Syria. That's because moments like these require serious people to suspend their ideology and their politics and simply do what is right. Now, this is a lesson some in leadership positions here in America could take to heart. But the confluence of the raw horror of the earthquake with some of the silliness we see in Washington, such as the shenanigans of a congressman who has admitted that he lied, and then lied again to the voters to win his seat, and the fact that his party members put up with it because they need his vote to keep their majority. And that's just one example of the silliness. All this gives me pause. Have we no dignity? Have we no shame? Aren't there some limits of decency, even with politicians? How can we justify spending even 5 more minutes on this silliness when there are real life and death issues that demand our attention? Whether it be addressing the needs of victims of natural disasters, confronting mass atrocities, providing for the basic needs of our people here at home, or assisting the valiant people of Ukraine, who are on the front line of a battle that affects the safety and security of us all. I harbor no delusions that the images from Turkey and Syria will end the silliness that affects a part of our politics, but maybe, just maybe, the need to provide aid and comfort at times of extreme disaster will remind people of goodwill what public service is supposed to be all about. وصلنا إلى ختام هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كان لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول البرنامج وبالأخص بشأن الفرق بين التحديدات الحقيقية وغير الحقيقية على ديمقراطيتنا، تواصلوا معي رجاءً عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو راسلوني مباشرة على الرابط @RobSatloff. إلى اللقاء في الأسبوع القادم. حتى ذلك حين شكراً وإلى اللقاء.